There once was a chivalrous guy who wasn't afraid to go die. His enemies flee, and then he hit C and let out a great battle cry. Hey guys, James here again with another game review, and today I want to talk about Chivalry 2, a multiplayer hack and slash game set in medieval times. If you've ever played Mordhaw or For Honor, you'll probably find a lot of similarities here, but for anyone who hasn't, I'd say the game is essentially Battlefield 1042. In Chivalry, you take part in fairly large-scale fictional battles and campaigns. You select one of 4 classes, each with their own subclasses, stats, weapons, and skills. You then charge into battle, unleashing your battle cry as you try and take down enemies and complete any objectives. So let's start with the classes. There's 4 main classes in Chivalry. First we have the Knight, which in general is supposed to be the tankiest class, having the most health and a nice variety of weapons available to them. Next we have the Footmen, who are slightly less tanky than Knights, but are usually armed with longer range weapons and shields. Then we have the Vanguard, who have less health than the Knight and Footmen, but are instead the fastest class and also have the most stamina. And finally, we have Archers, who are the ranged class that help support the front line. However, they are the squishiest and in general will get wrecked in hand-to-hand combat. They also limit the number of archers you can have in any match, which I do think was a smart thing to do. Each class has different subclasses which you can unlock by playing the game, and each of these subclasses have different unlockable weapons available to them as well. Overall, while I do think there are clearly some classes and weapons which are better than others, I have had my fair share of success with a bunch of them, and I think a lot of it ultimately comes down to personal preference. I do feel like some subclasses, specifically the Field Engineer, do seem to be quite weak though, and are far more situational. Each subclass also has different skills available to them, such as a banner you can plant down that heals nearby teammates, and an oil pot you can throw to burn enemies. For the most part, I like the different skills, but I do think that the med pack in particular is probably my least favorite and could maybe use a bit of a buff. Overall though, while I don't necessarily think the class balance is perfect, I personally never found any class or weapon to be particularly oppressive. Each has their strengths and weaknesses, and something interesting is the fact that certain weapons are better against certain classes, and this knowledge can be helpful. Ultimately, a lot of how you do comes down to your own skill with a blade. So this brings us to the combat, and I think the best way to describe the combat in Chivalry is dumb fun. You can fight either in first person or third person, and I think both have their pros and cons. The combat is a lot of fun as you hack and slash your way through enemies, and what I did find was that Chivalry is one of the few games that actually makes me move my physical body along with each swing of the sword, and that's not something I typically do. Despite the fact that I called it dumb fun, the combat is actually surprisingly deep. There's a number of different moves you can whip out, including regular swings, overhead attacks, stabs, kicks, power attacks, feints, blocks, dodges, and counters. I do think, however, that properly controlling the direction of your swings can be a bit finicky and doesn't always make sense to me. Placement and timing of your swings and defensive moves are important in winning fights, particularly in one-on-one combat. However, you won't always be able to show off your one-on-one skills though, as battles can be quite chaotic. It's pretty common to get gangbanged by a larger group, but at the same time, I've had instances where I, or an opponent, managed to hold their own in a one versus many. Then add in the fact that there's friendly fire, and then you definitely have a recipe for chaos. I think this makes it so that knowing your surroundings and what enemies are nearby, and then picking your fights accordingly, is an incredible skill to have in Chivalry 2. I personally did find that sometimes the blocking in the game did seem a little bit too strong though. It takes stamina to guard, but sometimes it would just feel like the guy could just defend everything, everywhere, all at once. There were some times where I'm pretty certain I should have gotten a strike in, but the dude somehow managed to guard his back and front at the same time. However, I only found this to be a minor annoyance in what otherwise is a pretty awesome combat system. Archery in the game is quite interesting too. It's fun for sure, but you definitely need to practice leading your shots and figure out some of the nuances if you want to get good with it. Getting headshots and one-hit kills though are so satisfying and are sweet, sweet candy. There's also different types of weapons and items you can use on the battlefield, such as the ballista and catapult. These aren't always easy to use, but when they work, they're actually really satisfying and can be a lot of fun. There can also just be a lot of different fun little moments throughout the game, like lopping someone's head off and then picking it up to throw as a projectile. You can also get your arms cut off and then you might be forced to headbutt enemies. You can throw rocks at people below you. You can Spartan kick people into the abyss. This game truly allows you to get medieval on people. One other thing I want to point out is that, oddly enough, kill stealing in this game isn't really that big of a deal. It can be annoying, sure, but you'll often need a bit of support if you want to easily defeat an enemy and continue on with objectives. Speaking of the objectives, this brings us to the modes, maps, and objectives. So the main mode you'll likely be playing is the 32 vs 32 mode, although there's also a 20v20, a 3v3, 1v1, and some different limited time modes. Then, within each of these modes, there are a couple of different maps and objective types. There's of course your classic team deathmatch and last team standing modes, but the main mode, and in my opinion the best mode you'll run into, will be the team objective mode. These take place on different maps with an attacking and defending team. The attacking team will then have to complete a series of objectives, such as attacking a gate, kidnapping pigs, and destroying ships. The defending team needs to try and hold off the attackers until the timer runs out, which honestly is a little boring and kind of sucks for the defenders, but overall, not too bad. Most maps have a series of objectives to complete, with more time being added to the game for each objective that you do complete. And there's actually quite a variety of different objectives, and overall, I do think that there's enough to keep things interesting throughout each match. There are even some objectives that present players with interesting opportunities, such as playing as a pagan druid who whacks people with a stick, or playing as an heir who needs to be protected by the rest of the team. I do think though that some objectives are either bugged, need to be made more clear, or are really just poorly designed. For example, on the Coxwell map, the last objective is stated as kill soldiers, and I think it's implied that you need to kill everyone at least once, but it's really not made that clear when it needs to be done, and it's not really easy to identify who's left either. There are also some times where the time additions for completing objectives seems a bit off. I'm sure I'm probably wrong and I'm just complaining, but it can really feel like opponents will get far more time to complete the same objectives that we get in another match. Again, it's probably not really the case, but it can really feel like that sometimes, even in games where we're really wrecking opponents. And finally, I think the map balance isn't always the best. Games actually do end up being quite interesting because I think they are usually designed to reach the final section and get down to the last second, but I think it's pretty clear that some maps favor one side, usually the attackers. I think the issue is also exacerbated by the fact that the team balancing can feel a bit out of whack. I found that players will often switch to the favored side at the beginning of matches, and if one side is losing, players will often just change teams to the other side or leave the game, and this can create a bit of a snowball effect as things become more and more imbalanced. Despite these issues though, I still think you can get a lot of fun out of the game from the combat alone, regardless of whether you're winning or losing matches. Finally, I just want to go over some of my other more minor gripes and things I noticed. For one thing, I think the party system needs a pretty big rework. For whatever reason, when you form a party, it doesn't move you out of a game together as a party, so you'll often need to remake the party if you ever need to back out of a game for whatever reason. You also can only play in a party of 4, which is a bit annoying for a game that allows you to play 32 on 32. I also believe that you're unable to party between Steam and Epic Games, which is a little bit dumb. It can also be a bit annoying how the game will matchmake you into games that are almost done. There's a number of games I get added into which end within 5 minutes of me joining, and that's just not fun. But I recognize that this is likely just because of the issue before with players leaving games, and it might be a little bit unavoidable. I also found the deserting function to be a little bit annoying. Basically, if you stray too far from the current objective, the game will attempt to spawn you closer. I get why they have this, but I feel like they need to make it so that it only occurs when you aren't in the middle of fighting someone. I also think the borders of some of the objectives need to be fixed. For example, when defending on the final section of Aberfell, you can easily trigger the deserting screen even though you're clearly near the Stonehenge and engaging with enemies. Finally, a minor gripe that I have is related to the color schemes of the sides. The main sides are red and blue, and that's pretty standard, but due to some of the more silvery costume designs and the fact that characters will get covered in blood, you can sometimes confuse people as being on the wrong team. Overall though, while I do think there are some clear issues with the game, I do have to say that I've really enjoyed my time with Chivalry 2. I think it really does a great job of making you feel like a medieval knight, and again, I think the game is just a lot of dumb fun. It's a really weird combination of being both intense and relaxing at the same time, and I think Chivalry 2 is a great game to get a couple of mindless hours of fun into after a long day. Personally, I'm giving Chivalry 2 a 3.5 out of 4. Is it worth it though? Clocking in at $40, I do think that the price might be a bit steep to some people, as the amount of content isn't exactly crazy. When you compare it to some of its competition, it's definitely a bit pricey as well, although it is a newer game. I personally don't hate it at $40, but I think most people would probably be better off waiting for it to be somewhere between $20 to $30. I personally copped it off Steam for $24 as part of a sale. But hey, that's just me. Let me know down below what you think. Have you tried Chivalry 2 and what'd you think of it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences, and of course, if you made it this far, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button to help out the channel, and as usual, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.